Report number 810, discussion. Yes, Representative Ohno.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In opposition.
Opposition, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, the proposition in this bill is simple. Show us your tax returns, or we'll keep you off Hawaii's ballot. I'd like to see the President's tax returns. I'd like those to be public. But I oppose any measure that tries to use the voters of Hawaii as leverage to accomplish that. I proudly voted for the candidate that released her tax returns. As a matter of fact, a majority of the country did. However, the candidate who kept his returns secret won. I think that some may argue that there's trust and transparency that's needed, and I agree with that. At this time, I desperately agree with that. But I think that any action should be taken at the federal level, rather than piecemeal, state by state. And that's because I think this is an ambitious goal. I think it's a long shot. I'd cringe to see us, our esteemed body, bar the voters of Hawaii from selecting a major presidential candidate. I think the public would call into question the integrity of our elections. I think the free and fair elections that we hold in Hawaii would have an asterisk next to them. Once again, I believe the best course of action is a federal solution providing uniformity across all 50 states. To those voters who voted for Trump, I do not agree with them, and I do not agree with his beliefs. But I believe even more stronger that we as Americans have the right to vote for our freely chosen candidate, even if I oppose him. In this body, Mr. Speaker, we have stood up for the minority time and time again. People who are different from us, people who aren't like us. In this case, I do not share the beliefs of our president. However, I must stand up for them. And I think that if the tables were turned, and I hope, they would stand up for my beliefs if I'm in the minority. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion, members? Stand Comm Report number 810. Yes, Representative Nakamura.
With reservations?
So ordered. Thank you, Representative. Representative Onishi.
Reservation.
So ordered. Thank you very much, Representative Har.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In opposition,
Opposition, please proceed.
may I please incorporate the words of the chair of IAC into the journals if they were my own?
So ordered.
And may I please request permission to enter written comments as well?
Absolutely.
Thank
So
you.
ordered. Thank you, Representative. Any further? Yes, Representative Kobayashi.
Reservations.
So ordered. Thank you, Representative. Representative Morikawa.
Same request, please.
So ordered. Thank you very much, Representative. Any further? Representative Cullen.
Reservations.
So ordered. Thank you, Representative. Representative Belatti.
Reservations.
So ordered. Thank you very much, Representative Yamane.
Reservations.
So ordered. Thank you very much, Representative. Yes, Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In support, and I'd ask to insert written comments.
So ordered.
Thank you. Just very briefly, the highest office in the land, the most important office in the land with the greatest reach not only with domestic policy but also foreign, is the only office in the land also not subject to federal conflict of interest laws, ethics, regulations, and other things that all the rest of us throughout the rest of the country who have a responsibility to stand up and advocate for our constituents and for our neighbors and families here in the United States. Already we have seen significant cause for concern, not only with this administration, but perhaps setting a precedent and a standard by which future administrations down the road may also avail themselves. I think we have an obligation to ask these difficult questions, especially now. This bill is not about a Democrat or a Republican. In fact, any particular presidential candidate applies to anyone who would occupy a future office. But one thing it does do is address some of the concerns being raised here and now today with a current president, for example, who, while I think many of us would disagree with his policies, have raised significant issues which we have no remedy otherwise to fix. Rulings the president has There are decisions the president has made on things already in place, on the Dakota Access Pipeline, for example, while simultaneously having investments in the company that would benefit directly from those decisions is the tip of the iceberg in reporting from the Wall Street Journal, which has identified over 500 other conflicts of interest, which could raise significant ethical, fiscal, and legal concerns for our nation. Mr. Speaker, this bill is important not just because we as the state of Hawaii feel that the presidency is important and ought to be accountable to all voters, but that the very fabric of our democracy, the transparency in elections, the ability for your average citizen to stand up and know who it is they're voting for and why, and understand that they're not going to be beholden to a company or a partner or their own financial interest or even another country, is paramount in our democracy and is something that has never been challenged in the way that it is now. We have an obligation as a state, Mr. Speaker, to act because the federal government will not anytime soon. There is no realistic path forward, and we've already seen this Congress defer multiple actions, multiple bills and resolutions that would even begin to ask what is appropriate behavior for a president. We have an obligation not to ourselves, but to our future generations who would be beholden to whomever is elected next, to make sure that that person has full transparency and accountability and serves on behalf of the people of this country and not on behalf of themselves or anyone else. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative. I've got Representative Tokioka, followed by Representative Ng, followed by Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No vote.
So ordered. In opposition, please proceed.
A few brief comments, Mr. Speaker. I understand the passion of the representative from Kailua, or I'm sorry, Waimanalo. And I think many of us feel the same way. But the concerns that I have would relate to the speech, the floor speech that the chair from IAC made, and a couple of other things. When the Attorney General of the state of Hawaii went to Washington, D.C., and they had a sit-down with the president, he specifically asked, were you one of the states that voted against and are suing me for the travel ban? We have, I believe we have 4 electoral votes in the state of Hawaii. I'm sure as we watch him on television, you know, the president is looking at this, and I'm not sure if he's going to be favorable on a caucus like this, sending him that message. And those are the concerns that we have, that the unintended consequences might be great. I think we all know that this legislature, the House and the Senate, has the smallest number of Republican members on both bodies, 6 in the House and none in the Senate. So, you know, when you're the president and you're looking at all of these things happening, I hope he doesn't take into consideration some of these things that are happening and make bad decisions when it comes to projects that we get in Hawaii and the funding from the federal government. So for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity. No vote.
Thank you very much, Representative. Representative Ng, followed by Representative Ward. Yeah, I'm sorry, Representative Ng.
Oh, WR.
So ordered.
I appreciate this bill. I'm speaking in reservations, not in deference to the current administration, but to the process. You know, uniformity of standards is important. Yes, the presidential office is exempt from a lot of conflicts of interest that we aren't, but we do not need to disclose our tax returns in order to run for office. If we do pass something like this, we will have that pressure. Folks will be saying, constitutionally, every elected official should follow suit just to make the standards uniform. Also, it's been noticed that the free press does work. There's been all these conflicts identified by the Washington Post or Wall Street Journal, I believe, with or without getting a hold of tax returns. If the public wants tax returns, it will make it clear in the election. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case this time around. There's a presumption that this bill is about conflict of interest and nothing else, but the pressure to release the tax return or not, that ability, that agency it goes far beyond that. I'm afraid that someone like me with student debt could be shamed. There's other reasons. Maybe you have some history that you don't think the election should really be about. It should be about
the issues and what the public wants, and not class shaming because you're too poor. Recently, the presidential elections have been multi-millionaires, billionaires now running, and the last thing you want to see is folks saying, ha ha ha, you're so poor, you shouldn't represent us. And this bill might be as the representative from Hawaii might say, a nice poke in the eye from Democrats, but I don't think it necessarily serves the public. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Ward.
Speaker, in opposition.
Opposition, please
a brief
proceed.
comment that I didn't intend to make, but inevitably, I guess, the presidential issue does come up to the floor of this learned House. First of all, I really appreciate the chair of IEC and his empathy for the minority. That's a vicarious statement, if you will, for what we on this side of the aisle often go through, often feel. But now we as a state, Mr. Speaker, are a minority. I think the reality spoken by the representative of Kauai needs to be taken to heart. Some of us are trying to bridge what otherwise is an outlier in the national political culture. Some of us are trying to work with the White House. Some of us are trying to work with departments, particularly for funding that's already been cut for some particular special programs for special indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, it's an uphill climb, and I think we have to heed the message of Harry Truman. If you will recall, when MacArthur and Harry Truman were kind of going at it with each other, Truman was trying to hold the general down from getting out of line, and they were going to have a meeting on Wake Island. Mr. Truman was the first to land, and General MacArthur purposely kept circling the airport just to keep his president waiting. And there's the message. Truman said as he was approached by MacArthur, "General, I don't give a damn what you think of Harry Truman, but this is your president and you respect him." Harry Truman's message can make sense today. We have to respect our president. We have to work with our president, just like you have to work with the minority as a minority, as we have worked with you as the majority. Let us be tolerant. Let us be reasonable. Let's use the data. Let's not use opinion and name-calling and all the things that are just threshing around in this nation. The sky is not going to fall. We are a land of laws and not of individuals. Whoever does wrong gets caught and gets put before the jurors and for the courts. So, Mr. Speaker, I think this bill is a little bit in that direction to where we call in question our leaders at the national level. And I think we just need to take a deep breath and know that the sky is not going to fall, regardless of who's the president of this great nation. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative DeCoite.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. In opposition.
Opposition, please proceed.
Brief comment. I'd like to insert the words of the chair from IAC as if they were my own.
So ordered.
And really, from the law state, we got to work together. We might not agree on everything. And I think, we need to look at what's happening before us, as we need to be funding our schools, our kupunas, and figuring out where we're going to get this funding. So with that being said, in opposition, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Further, yes, Representative Takayama.
With reservations.
So ordered. Thank you, Representative. Representative Belatti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In opposition.
Opposition, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, who says that floor debate cannot change opinion? I would like to adopt the words of the representative from Nu'uanu as if they were my own.
So ordered.
I would also like to say, I think, in response to the representative from Kauai who mentioned, our state attorney general who made the choice to sue Trump. I think we have to be strategic in how we interact with this administration and any administration. And there are times when the state of Hawaii will have to stand up. But I think on this matter, when we are told as young leaders, pick your battles wisely, I think my opposition grows out of the fact that we should pick our battles wisely. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Morikawa.
Thank you. I'd like to change reservations to a no vote and adopt the words of the chair of IAC.
So ordered. Thank you very much, Representative. Representative Presti.
Strong support.
Strong support. Please proceed.
First, I'd like to adopt the words of the representative from Waimanalo as my own.
So ordered.
Thank you. And I really like some wonderful things said by the chair of IAC, and agree in spirit with a lot of what he said. I disagree with the conclusion, however. I'm just dismayed that it seems that some of the tenor of conversation is that let's give in to fear of what he'll do in response. And that is no way to lead. You know, ethics and transparency ought not to be a partisan issue, Mr. Speaker, but it seems more and more on the national level, if you're for ethics and you're for transparency, then it's a partisan issue. And that's not okay, and I think it's important to stand with integrity to say, yeah, if you're going to call everything that's a criticism of you fake news, well then let's hear it from the source itself and see what the reality is. Because we've all, in the conversation, has been so detached from reality that people have lost their bearings. And this is basic ethics and integrity, and therefore strong support.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Matsumoto.
No vote, please.
So ordered.
And permission to insert written comments.
Also so ordered.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Brower, followed by Representative McDermott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In support.
In support, please proceed.
I have a lot of the concerns that were raised, but at the same time, Mr. Speaker, I watch a lot of Fox News. And I don't overthink my emails and watch a lot of Fox News. And we do have a presidential candidate who said he would release his tax returns, not obligated, but he said he voluntarily would, prior to being elected president. After being elected president, he said he had no intentions of releasing his tax returns. As a candidate, he has said that he was waiting for an IRS audit to finish before he would release those returns. But his spokesperson, as well as he, has said now that he will not be releasing those returns. So I think there is some merit to the measure, but I do have the same amount of caution we've heard on the floor today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative McDermott.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition again.
Opposition, please proceed.
As I said in the second reading, I don't think it goes far enough, but I won't rehash those comments. But I will point out that when President Obama was running for his second term, there were several states that passed bills requiring birth certificates, and those were adjudicated in the courts, and the courts said it's up to the party who they put forward. It's not our decision as a court to make that determination. So there were several states. Arizona was one that comes to mind. There were a couple of down south. He never produced the birth certificate in 2012, but the states did not have the right, according to the courts, to put these sorts of regulations on a presidential candidate when the National Democratic Party puts them forward or the Republican National Party puts them forward. So I think that would be to bear that in mind. Second, the contents of the tax returns, I will put my Nostradamus hat on and say that he made a lot of money and paid as little as legally possible. And to see the companies he has an interest in, you would go to the SEC financial disclosure, which is about 500 pages long. So those are my comments, sir.
Thank you. And just a clarification, Representative McDermott, I think the first time you spoke on this bill, you actually were in support and said it doesn't go far enough. Is that correct?
Right, that's correct. Second reading, I was in support with reservations. Now I'm against it.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the clarification. Further discussion, members?
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Representative Aquino.
Reservations, please. Thank you.
So ordered. Thank you very much, Representative. Any further discussion? If not, thank you very much.